Welcome, one and all. We're gathered together here to discuss Quantum Leap 2022, the revival series, all the way up to episode 12 somehow. This one entitled Let Them Play. Before we get into all of that, there will be spoilers ahead not only for this episode, but for the season up until now. If you're not interested in those, please duck out. Otherwise, consider yourself warned. Another 2 points I'd like to address right up front. This episode deals very heavily with trans issues. It might be what you would consider back in the day a very special episode. I am neither an expert nor have I had to deal with these things personally in my own life. Also, if you're interested in how this episode actually related to people that have dealt with this situation in real life, I've seen several videos from other content creators on YouTube, so feel free to go check those out. And secondly, if you're explicitly here for a hate video about agenda pushing and how this was a terrible assault on our society or something like that, I'm also not going to give that to you. Now that those things are out of the way, let's crack on with the actual show. This one, as I said, was entitled Let Them Play, and that's a very apt title for what actually happens in this episode. Ben finds himself at the very start leaping into the body of a high school female basketball coach. One of the players was just injured, and he has to make a decision on what to do. We find out a little later in the episode that Ben himself has had at least a passing interest in basketball, if not an actual overall education in the sport, so he kind of gets what's going on, and I think that does a little bit for the characterization throughout the episode because it allows him to focus more on the social issue, more so than having to deal with the basketball situation of everything. He decides right now that because this player is injured, even against her protests of wanting to continue play because she's being scouted, he needs to pull her and put in a healthy player, and based on the bench, there's really only one option. He puts this player in a little trepidatiously because some of the players are like, you sure you want to do this? Even this character is like, you sure you want to do this? He's like, yeah, why not? You're on the team, right? Puts her in, she goes out, scores the winning point. That's the end of it. Or so we think. Because as we come to find out, there are several situations going on here, all revolving around the same thing. Ben is actually the father of this girl. This girl is actually a trans teenager, and as we find out later in the episode, he has explicitly agreed not to put her in the game because of the school board promise or something like that. So she has been put in the game. There is protesters there. The teammates aren't all on board with this, although most of them seem to be except for one or two. And now Ben has to deal with this whole situation. So one little point I'd like to bring up here is something that after watching a lot of Quantum Leap kind of fades into the background a little bit, but all of these situations Ben is having to deal with, they're kind of split-second decisions. He's being thrust into a circumstance, no real context clues except what he can immediately see and figure out. So that's gotta be eating away at him a little bit. Then we cut to what this episode is actually going to be about, primarily, at least the Leap story, and that's going to be how this girl, Gia, the daughter of Ben's character, is actually dealing with the fact of being transgender in school, in her family, in her personal life, on the basketball team, within her friend group. And this brings us to something that this episode does that I don't really believe Quantum Leap has done before. It kind of breaks the rules of how the Quantum Leap show is normally presented. Normally, we are unable to see or experience events that are outside the vicinity of the Leaper, or in some circumstances, the hologram. So for instance, in the original Quantum Leap, Al would go off and kind of do some recon in his holographic form. I don't believe we've seen Addison really do that yet, but it's something that she should be able to have the capacity to do. We spend a couple of moments in this episode, both now in the locker room, later on in the locker room, and when she runs away inevitably, with Gia in a situation where Ben and Addison are not present. So we've thus broken the time travel rules we normally have, which kind of gives this episode an off feeling, and it took me a little bit to figure that out. I felt like, why does this not quite feel like Quantum Leap to me? And I think that's it, because we were not experiencing things through the Leaper. We were experiencing things through this teenage trans woman who is dealing with so many situations that was the focal point of the episode. And I think they placed this perfectly within the season for that to actually feel a bit more genuine, because last episode was heightened sci-fi, time loops and all that stuff. So this episode, to kind of break those sci-fi rules a little bit in service of the story, actually felt better coming off an episode with heightened sci-fi. I don't know if that makes sense to anyone, but that's how I'm rationalizing it in my brain. So the whole crux of this storyline is that Gia, originally in the timeline that they were trying to prevent, ran away from home. Nobody ever discovered what happened to her. Eventually, throughout the course of the episode, we discover that she ran away from home and died somewhere. The body was misidentified by either the coroner or whoever deals with this, the medical examiner, I'm not sure, and it was never able to be linked to the missing persons case because they were looking for the wrong gender the whole time. Ben changed things immediately. By putting her in, she wasn't supposed to play this game, they weren't supposed to win. She became a living legend as far as trans representation, so much so that Ian in the present had information that this happened. And this is fascinating to find out because this is, again, the first time we've seen it in my memory in the recent Quantum Leap. Time has changed around our characters, and they're now perceiving the new timeline instead of the original timeline. So far, we've really only had experience through Ziggy with this. In the new Quantum Leap, we definitely had instances in the original where characters had their memories changed. But it's fascinating that Ian, right off the bat, can remember this information that didn't happen in the original timeline. They had to then go and look up the original timeline, and I do enjoy that. I do enjoy that little tidbit, and while Ian only had a couple of scenes that actually impacted it, they both felt real. And I also like the scene at the end where Ian was called into the hollow chamber, what is it called, the imaging chamber, where Addison normally goes to hang out, and Ian is brought in, and they are both viewing the end basketball game together. I'm not entirely certain we've ever seen that before, but I do like the fact that that is something they can do. The only downside I have to it is that Ben and Ian didn't interact, and I don't think they've had an interaction since Ben left. It would have been kind of interesting to see the reaction that Ben had to Ian, considering what we find out in the subplot, the ongoing storyline that happened in present day. An upside and a downside here. Magic and Jen go off to investigate the name that Janice gave them at the end of last episode, who the person who gave Ben the original information in Need to Leap was, thereby basically giving Janice no point in another episode, and it just feels like they don't know what to do with Janice yet. Why did they bring her in so soon just to not have her do much? That's a small point of contention. Magic and Jen worked well together. I like to see them. They went off to a bar or a coffee shop, something like that, and the proprietor had on camera an interaction with Ben during a specific date. The barista, or whatever you want to call them, was not exactly forthcoming until Magic happened to mention the date, and then it was kind of clear that this date took place during a period of time that this character, Dottie, I believe, did not have any memories. I think the episode thought they were being a bit more cryptic about this, even though it was kind of obvious where they're going, but I digress. What we come to find out is that this is a very similar experience to what Magic had back when Sam was inside of him all those years ago in the original Quantum Leap. This missing time, but this feeling of not being in control, this feeling of another supplanting your consciousness in your body, or however you want to explain that. Now, this person being an artist has been able to draw the face that keeps bouncing around in their mind. This was fascinating. The face, the leaper, I guess you could call them, that was inside inhabiting this person during the missing time, when Ben was told he needed to leap in order to save Addison, save the future, whatever's going on, was Ian. So again, a good use of Ian in this episode, even though we don't know what's going on. I personally think Ian was the only person capable of leaping back to give Ben the warning before the Quantum Leap program was taken over by the rogue agency and the government, or the actual government shut them down for not doing what they're supposed to, the Congresswoman, the Oversight Committee, whatever's actually going on. So this feeds into the ongoing theory that we've had since the very beginning, that somebody leapt, and that's what led Ben in this whole thing to begin with. So Ian being the focal point of the changes in the timeline, or whatever you want to call it, is going to be very interesting going forward. Now back to the actual leap. The storyline, it was kind of more of a fairy tale or a fantasy as opposed to a real life feeling thing, based purely on the resolution at the end. But the fact that kind of all the minds were changed, the mother who had a problem with a trans teen being on the team, the head of the school who didn't want to make all of these calls, they all kind of came around at the end, and it was kind of a big happy moment where they overcame the obstacles and everything was solved. It also felt like they just weren't being true to reality, that things couldn't be wrapped up in a 42-minute episode. It's nice to see a happy ending. It just didn't ring true to me that everyone's opinions would be changed and everyone would have come around so easily. Overall, I would have to say that the episode didn't necessarily forward too much outside of the present-day storyline, finding out that Ian is somehow involved, but I don't fault it for that whatsoever, because I think if you take one or two detours to tell these more specialized stories, these specific storylines, that it is something that a program like Quantum Leap or a time-traveling program or something like this actually provides an opportunity to do in a space that feels a bit more genuine, because we're leaping through specific periods. The ability to address something like this actually provides a bit more scope. While I did like the episode for what it was trying to do, like I said, it just didn't ring like everything should have been resolved as quickly, as easily. But what did you think of this episode? As always, leave all your thoughts below, leave a like while you're down there, subscribe, do all of that stuff. Do you think that this episode accomplished what they were trying to do? And what do you think about the whole reveal with Ian? Let me know what you think, and until next time, I believe we're taking another freaking week off, so we'll return February 20th, I want to say. But until next time, keep on leaping.